And thanks for joining us today, friends. I have on the line our good friend Michael Krieger from LibertyBlitzkrieg.com and our regular contributor, Rory. Gentlemen, are you there?
Yes, I am, John, I'm here.
Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be on.
All right, gentlemen. Well, folks, if you don't know, LibertyBlitzkrieg.com is one of our favorite websites. We link to Michael's articles on a daily basis. Liberty Blitzkrieg is now ranked in the top 30,000 of the most heavily trafficked websites in the United States. And Mike is just one of those guys that always hits the nail on the head, like Michael Snyder at Economic Collapse blog. Michael Krieger, your stuff is so darn interesting to read. How did you start the website, and what drives you to keep this work going every day? Because I know how difficult it is to put up original content.
As you know, I've been writing, and a lot of my readers know, I've been writing about issues related to the global financial system and monetary policy way back to my days on Wall Street. I was writing controversial pieces even at my seat within the belly of the beast. So I've always had a passion for that. I've always had a passion for truth. Once I realized how bad things were, at least once I had my awakening, quote unquote. But then I just decided to take it to the next level. A couple of years after I extracted myself from Wall Street and New York City and had a clear head and just became more and more interested in all sorts of other issues related to macro things, whether it's the food industry, the drug industry, the military industrial complex. And now what we're realizing thankfully through the work of Edward Snowden and actually Barrett Brown before him, who a lot of people don't know about, but Barrett Brown is a guy that I've become increasingly fascinated by because he's the one that first informed me about the evils done by the defense contractor Booz Allen Hamilton. And he's actually in jail right now, Barrett, for pasting a link.
Well, let's talk about Edward Snowden, and let's talk about these contractors that seem to be overrunning the Republic. And they get to work in the shadows. They work behind the firewall of the shadows in the military-industrial complex. And what do you make of the whistleblowers? Because Bradley Manning is facing, 136 years in prison for trying to follow his conscience and do the right thing. And General Keith Alexander was just heckled at the Black Hat Conference by, hackers that don't trust a word coming out of the NSA. What do you make of this current atmosphere, this environment we're in of the NSA really and the government really openly targeting and trying to purge whistleblowers?
Hey, Sean. So we do have a little bit of spotty connection, so I'm only hearing part of your questions, but I got enough to be. I do want to use a quote from a article I just posted this morning of a debate on Piers Morgan's show on CNN with Glenn Greenwald, James Risen, and the CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. And the key thing here is this guy James Risen, who I bet you a lot of your audience even isn't that familiar with. He's this Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist that has now been forced to testify because of a federal appeals court against his source. A CIA employee, Jeffrey Sterling. And James Risen has said he'll go to jail rather than testify against his source as a journalist. So he's fighting this thing. And this is what he said on the show. He said, this is James Risen, said, that's the thing I don't understand about the climate in Washington these days. People want to have debates on television and elsewhere, but then you want to throw the people that start the debates in jail. And that's a really key point there, because that's what you're hearing all these hypocrites say on TV from both parties. They're saying, yeah, we need to discuss this, but they're up in arms about the fact that this guy let everybody know what they were doing. So, it's pure hypocrisy. These people know that they have nothing to stand on, and they know that they can't essentially, defend these programs in a lot of ways. All these guys went out of their way to not have a debate in the first place.
What do you make of what the NSA is doing, and what do you make of the power that General Keith Alexander wields?
I think it's a really good thing that all of these folks went out of their way to hide this from us. James Clapper, as you know, committed perjury in front of Congress. Keith Alexander wants all this stuff secret. All of these national security fascists don't want us to know anything. So the fact that Keith Alexander felt that he had to, this guy runs the NSA. This guy doesn't have time to be going to conferences all the time and speaking. So for him to feel the need to go out there and apologetically in a way almost say, hey, we need your guys' help. Come join our team. We're the good guys. That's good for us because we've got them now on the run. and on the defensive, and that's where they belong.
Yeah, I agree. The thing that frightens me is the fact that we've moved so far away from the rule of law, and we do seem to be seeing a purge of whistleblowers. Those who come public, those that would dare speak truth, end up being punished or thrown in jail. Or in the case of Bradley Manning, they faced 136 years in prison. We see the mysterious deaths of reporters and investigative journalists like Breitbart, most recently Michael Hastings. Do you think that there's a chilling effect underway right now? I mean, I've even heard that the NSA and the powers that be were trying to target Glenn Greenwald to get him to shut up.
No, that's absolutely right. And the guy I mentioned earlier, Barrett Brown, the investigative journalist that exposed Booz Allen Hamilton originally and who's rotting in a jail cell in Texas at the moment for almost a year now without bail, he discovered very early on that they were actually specifically targeting Glenn Greenwald. And this was before, the Snowden leaks or anything. They knew that this guy was a powerful force that they wanted to stop in his tracks. And they were already talking about ways in which to discredit him or come out with, info or like pressure him and scare him into stopping. And it didn't work. And here's the bigger point. Do I think that the NSA throwing people in jail or the government throwing people in jail and intimidating people and being so aggressive under the Espionage Act is going to cause the resistance to in any way, shape, or form a retreat? Absolutely not. I see zero evidence of it. Certainly from my end, it hasn't changed my behavior at all. Well, it may be my behavior a little bit, and I'll get into that in a second, but it hasn't changed my desire or drive. It's actually encouraged me even more. And I can certainly see from your end, none of the things that, they may throw in your direction is going to stop you. So no, we're not going to stop. We're never going to stop. We're not going to lose. We're going to win. And the only thing that I see changing is a lot of us maybe have to take a different tact or in the way that we go about making our points or whatever, maybe have to adjust it a little bit. But that's not retreating. I see Edward Snowden as a prime example of that, right? Did going after Thomas Drake or William Binney or any of these guys before him stop Edward Snowden? No, right? And now we have, the most powerful league we've ever had, and that's after all the intimidation tactics. But the thing I have seen that changed is that Snowden was smart enough because he saw what was done to people before him to do it in a way where he got out of Dodge, which is exactly what he should have done, which is what Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon's papers wrote in the Washington Post, said he did the right thing by leaving. So Edward Snowden is a great example of people still willing to go out there and doing it in a different way, a smarter way, which is leaving the country because it's not safe here.
Well, yeah, and that's what concerns me because, in the case of Glenn Greenwald, who you mentioned, who works for The Guardian, he's an American citizen, but he doesn't live in this country, which I think has provided him with some measure of protection, considering that the powers that be want nothing more than to silence him. And again, if we look at Breitbart and Michael Hastings, one wonders if there isn't a physical purge underway by way of doing people harm. And in the case of others like Stuart Rhodes or Dan Johnson over at Panda, Stuart Rhodes over at Oath Keepers, we see attempts to incriminate with child pornography and things of that nature. So I definitely think things are getting scary. But to your point, those of us who believe in truth, honor, and speaking out while we still have a First Amendment, we're not going to stop because we do have the lawful right to speak truth to power. That is what America is and still stands for, at least on paper.
Yeah, and you know what, Sean? I mean, the time for the state to have really, I guess, wrapped this up for the side of evil or fascism or statism is past. I think the genie is way too far out of the bottle, and I'm seeing this now in my everyday life. I mean, friends of mine that are smart but not particularly don't have the time or not particularly historically, let's say, politically aware are becoming way more aware. And Snowden is a big part of it, but not the only thing. And so I feel like the tide is definitely shifting on the ground. And I think the Amash Amendment is proof of that, right? I mean, that was an amendment, and while it didn't pass, it almost passed.
That's right.
And people like Nancy Pelosi and others that I've written about are being exposed as such hypocrites. They're being forced to scramble now and defend their no vote. The House of Representatives, as you know, is a 2-year term. So that's where you sort of see the real groundswell show up first is in how the representatives vote, because they can get kicked out real quick. So yes, I'm very encouraged by the Amash Amendment, how close it came to passing, and I think the tide is way turned in our favor.
I agree with you because I was talking with Harley Schlanger from LaRouche not long ago. He was our guest, and he actually said that vote, even though Congress voted to allow NSA spying to continue, he thought it was very encouraging because it was just narrowly defeated. So a lot of folks from both the left and the right joined together to try to back the Constitution.
Absolutely. And, another thing that I'd like to point out to people when they become a little despondent is that let's also just look at Justin Amash for a second, someone that I think we've all had on our radar screens for a while, but seems to really be coming into his own now as a statesman and not a politician. And, of course, there's a huge difference. Ron Paul was a statesman and not a politician, and he's, I think, 33 years old. All right. I'm 35 years old. And I remember reading somewhere about 2 or 3 years ago how my generation had the lowest participation in Congress in American history. Right? We just didn't participate. We weren't there. We weren't active. We were doing other things. We were potentially just brainwashed, whatever. And so the fact that Justin Amash, someone that's basically my age, is now almost, close to becoming something of the leader in the Republicans, if the Republicans survive in the House of Representatives, is a wonderful sign. So this is the future. All these old hacks like Pelosi and Boehner, all these guys are just greedy lapdogs with absolutely no moral base, philosophy, or much intelligence either, other than just a nasty cunning that politicians tend to have. They're gone. They're the old school. They're just fighting desperately to hang on. So no, like I said, look, it's like from that Shakespeare, from Julius Caesar. There's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads to fortune. Well, fortune, whatever you want to call it, success, there is a tide. It's here. And I think we're on the right side of that tide.
Well, I absolutely love your perspective because I feel the same way about I think you can throw Ted Cruz into the category of statesman, can't you? I mean, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Amash, I think he's from Michigan. Is that correct?
Amash is from Michigan, correct.
Yeah, and I just think that, the people, the traitors to the Constitution, some of which you just mentioned, you can add to the group Joe Lieberman and John McCain and Lindsey Graham. That's the old gatekeeping crowd, right? And I think they are on the way out, certainly in the court of public opinion, and specifically in the court of international public opinion. I mean, the secrets of the U.S. government, the totalitarianism, internationally, the world sees this gate, this Orwellian gate that's been put up around our country. And I think that's good news.
Absolutely. It's this exposure that's happening. It's happening all over the place. It's not just with the NSA. It's within, whether it's Monsanto, the Federal Reserve, the NSA. It's all happening. The curtain's being pulled back. People are getting it. And to your point about, other senators and representatives that are coming out for freedom and liberty, or at least on civil liberties issues, uniting in a bipartisan manner is great. And, look, when you take Ron Wyden, who's been great on these issues of drones and surveillance of Oregon, he's a Democratic senator from Oregon, and then you take some others, like you mentioned, let's say a Ted Cruz in the Senate on the Republican side. You don't have to agree with all of them on everything, okay? We're each individual human beings. But when it comes to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, there is no compromising.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Michael. And as it pertains to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the rule of law, that is all we have in this country to protect us, right? Is what our founders gave us. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and even though this government, this fascist government, right? Corporations in bed with government leaders is fascism. This fascist government wants us to move us away from those founding documents, but it's real evident that people across this country are waking up and have had enough. And I think it's just great news to hear that people in your immediate life, friends, colleagues, are starting to wake up because of what's been going on with Edward Snowden and all of this whistleblowing.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to belittle other issues that are important to people because I understand that. But what I am saying is that people need to recognize politicians are cunning, they're crafty, they're manipulative. They are doing this on purpose. They are steering you towards issues that are not fundamental in the Bill of Rights to capture your emotion and then cause you to vote for someone just playing off of your emotions. Similarly to 9/11, Sean, we've discussed, I saw the towers fall. I never went back to my building in Three World Financial. We don't need to go into that. But I was emotionally vulnerable at that point, and politicians took advantage of my emotional vulnerability to have me go to sleep and essentially not even think about the civil liberties issues at that time. And that's what happened to a lot of Americans. And I want people to understand that politicians do that. And so When you feel like you're being drawn to vote for a guy because you agree with him on some side issues or social issues or whatever it may be, and this goes for Democrats and Republicans alike, just try for a second to use the Bill of Rights as the litmus test. We can figure out all of the other issues we have as a society later on. If we lose the Bill of Rights, we lose everything, right? Freedom. If you don't have freedom, nothing else matters. And people need to understand that. That needs to be the awakening, that we need to have a laser focus on this, because the politicians will try to mislead us, confuse us, emotionally manipulate us at every step of the way. We can't allow that anymore. We need to grow up.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why we post your material on a daily basis. I just want to take people down memory lane and just the recent headlines that we like to amusingly call doomer headlines. And all that means is it's the real news. Is on July 26, you posted an article called "Who Are We at War With?" Sorry, that's classified. And on August 1st, you posted an article called "Military Has Awarded Contracts to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan." So, Mike, when you talk about what happened on 9/11 and the fact that it caused many of us to go to sleep and shut down emotionally, allowing the military-industrial complex and corrupt leaders to take us into unconstitutional wars and to do things that we, the people, would have never otherwise agreed with, I think this current news that you're posting is a great example of the dichotomy of where we still are. I mean, the U.S. military has awarded contracts to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Aren't we supposed to be at war with Al-Qaeda, Mike?
Well, right, and as you know, I mean, it's mainstream news that the Syrian rebels that we're allied with in Syria have large Al-Qaeda elements to it. Again, this is not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact. And, what I try to do, and I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, of course, because the alternative media is the media, and I without that we'd be doomed. But I try to, and I make an effort. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but I make an effort to try to link to big sites when I come up with stories. The reason I do that is because, just naturally and by human nature, people will their eyes will glaze over when they see some crazy headline or what seems to be a crazy headline that can't possibly be true, and then they see a link to a website that they've never heard of. It's way more effective, at least for me, to try to wake people up by having a headline that seems unbelievable and then link to Bloomberg News or the New York Times, right? Because if it's being reported these mainstream media outlets, then not only, they have no interest in reporting the truth. They have to. And so that article you mentioned about us awarding contracts, 42 of them, or 43 of them, I believe, to Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan. Military contracts, millions and millions of dollars. That was a Bloomberg News article.
I think you're very savvy to link to mainstream media sources that do reveal some truth. I mean, we see that all over. The Guardian, occasionally the New York Times, the Washington Post. They will post blurbs of truth. Fox News, a blurb of truth here and there, but then they'll spend a day on Trayvon Martin. So there is truth seeping out from mainstream media sources only because they have to cover it. If they don't, they become 100% completely irrelevant because the alternative news media is really stealing their thunder, and the American people are getting sick and tired of being lied to because now the lies are so transparent. It's so easy to see them.
It's that things have gotten so completely corrupt and ridiculous, it can't be covered up anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? That's what we're here for. That's why we're having this conversation, is because we are trying to uncover that which they are attempting to cover up. I want to switch directions now and talk to you a little bit about gold and silver. On August 2nd, you posted an interesting headline called "Pakistan Bans Gold Imports for 30 Days. Meanwhile, Mike, we see J.P. Morgan's eligible gold at the COMEX plunging to 1 ton or 46,000 ounces. And I actually have a clip I want to play for you here in a second from a guest that I spoke with, SRS Rocco, or Steve St. Angelo is his real name, about what's going on at the COMEX. But what do you make of Pakistan banning gold imports for 30 days, Mike?
Right. So Pakistan is not being they're being pretty straightforward as far as why they're doing this. They're doing it because, as most of your listeners probably know, India recently imposed an 8% import duty on gold to try to reduce demand of Indians buying gold. So guess what? The market wins. If Indians want to buy gold, Indians will buy gold. Okay. And they are. And so what they've figured out is they basically, people have been importing the gold without a duty through Pakistan and then sending it over into India. So now Pakistan's saying, well, no, we don't want gold coming into India either. We don't, of course, because somebody high up is being pressured. But so now they're cracking down on imports of gold so that the Indians can't buy gold. I mean, it's just absurd. But the bigger point, right, and this is what I mentioned in my piece, is with gold plunging and, the narrative being that nobody wants gold anymore because the U.S. dollar is so great or the U.S. economy is so strong, why are governments panicking to stop their people from buying it? It shouldn't be a problem. There apparently, based on the price, there's this flood of gold. It must be a tsunami of gold ounces everywhere. So I don't see why governments are taking even more aggressive measures to crack down on it, which they are. So my feeling is what's happened is you've had a lot of Western selling and paper selling, and those in the East, like in China, in Dubai, we've seen similar reports of huge physical demand. They don't buy GLD shares. They don't buy paper. They buy the physical, and they're buying a lot of it. And so the powers that be globally are concerned about that, and they know the truth of the underlying demand, and they're trying to stop it. So that's my read on the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's very insightful. I want to give you my read on what's going on with the Shanghai silver stocks and the COMEX inventories. After you listen to this soundbite, I hope you can hear this okay. Hang on, listen to this.
The Shanghai silver stocks on April 11th were 1,124 tons. I just checked this morning, and another 18 tons fell off. And on July 30th, another 21 tons were removed from the Shanghai. So right now, the Shanghai silver stocks are at 536 tons. In just 3.5 months, it has declined 52%.
Now, Mike, I want to play for you this second clip from SRS Rocco, from SRSRoccoReport.com. Listen to this as it pertains to the COMEX.
In the beginning of 2013, the inventories of the COMEX were 11.5 million. They're now at 6.9. So just in a little more than a half a year, we've lost 40% of the silver at the COMEX. And a majority of that has come from the J.P. Morgan category.
Now, did you hear that okay, Mike?
I did, Sean.
Oh, okay, great. I'm glad you're there.
I try to avoid, trying to be the expert on what's happening in COMEX vaults or anything like that. Frankly, I don't follow it closely, and quite frankly, I don't really trust the data I'm given. So I just want to make that clear. But on the flip side, I always thought that there was a strong possibility when things were really close to blow up phase that the markets would become irrational to the point that you wouldn't be able to tell anything from market signals, and there could be this period where the power structure says, okay, well, we're going all in, right? We're gonna do everything we can in the most aggressive manner possible to just as a last ditch effort to get things under control. And I think that's probably where we're at right now on some level. That's what's going on. Now, look, there are some fundamental factors here at play too. The Chinese economy has essentially blown up. The Chinese have been big buyers of gold, and evidence is that they still are. But, silver is still largely an industrial metal. So if China blows up, then, you're going to have less demand for silver. So, there's a lot of things at play. But no, I do tend to agree and think that we are in the midst of, and I don't know how long it can last, but we are in the midst of an extraordinarily aggressive, basically, we're going to do whatever it takes to get things under control situation right here. So I do think that is happening.
Rory, are you back on the line?
Back on the line.
All right, my brother. Unload your Bitcoin question from Mike Krieger because he just got back from a Bitcoin conference.
I know that you're a huge fan of Bitcoin, and the question that I have is regarding the difference between a debit card and a Bitcoin, because from my perspective, they're both an electronic currency, and both are easily related. And I'm not trying to attack Bitcoin or any of that. I'm trying to understand how Bitcoin is better than a debit card or a credit card, and why I would want to use that.
So you may not want to use that. And when I talk about my support for Bitcoin, it's not in an attempt to convince people that they need to use it or they need to see it in the exact same way that I. What I like to say is it's sort of in between the fiat money that we have and gold and silver, let's say, okay? Now what I mean by that is this. It's that a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between a Bitcoin and the US dollar? They're both just these figments of imagination that have been essentially created. That is true. There's a lot of difference, though. Number one, the U.S. dollar is the single most important instrument of power and oppression of the U.S. military industrial Wall Street complex. Bitcoin is not. The U.S. dollar is essentially forced down people's throats with the barrel of a gun. Bitcoin is not. The Federal Reserve notes, slave coupons, are created, and credit is created too, at a whim by 12 individuals at the Federal Reserve. Bitcoin doesn't do that. There's a fixed supply curve. You can look at what the supply curve is, and you can choose whether to use it or not. It's a free market. It's a choice. So for me, I have to be honest with you. Look, there's one thing for people like gold and silver, and say that's real money, Bitcoin isn't, and that's my position. That's fine. Right? I don't have a problem with that. I'm not trying to convince anyone or like be this like a priest of Bitcoin. My point is to be against it radically, or to be angered by it or upset by it. That to me seems irrational, dogmatic. And in some ways, people that do that, gold and silver people, I feel are sort of being like the enemy in a lot of ways. Dollar bugs. It's like, why would anyone be? It's almost like people that put all their eggs in the gold and silver basket, saying this is money, this is always money, this is going to be money. It's like a religion again, And I don't like that either. So for me, it's just philosophically anything that's kind of a big kick to the nuts of the establishment or something different, whether it's Bitcoin, another virtual currency, my point, or whether it's crested butte bucks, right? A local currency that you create and use within a community. I don't care. I support every single one of them. I support anything that people want to use in voluntary transactions for trade. Not that I'm saying that Bitcoin is the ideal form of it. I'm certainly not. I'm saying I support it, and that's it.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me too, Michael, when you parse the language that way, because, we see the federal government targeting Bitcoin, but we don't see the federal government targeting debit cards, which are part of the Rockefeller banking complex. And every time you use yours, the banks get, 1 or 1.5% rake on that purchase, which is just outrageous. So Bitcoin is out of the system, and I do think it's interesting. Unfortunately, we only have 90 seconds left in this broadcast, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on, Mike, and taking time out of your busy day here on a Saturday to join us and to spread some truth. We just are just so grateful for what you do over there at libertyblitzkrieg.com.
Well, what can I say, Rory, Sean? I mean, I'm indebted to you guys for what you do, for your tireless effort, for having me on, for your support. And I hope to be with you both in the future soon. And keep up the great work. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to tune in and listen. Thank you for supporting, liking, spreading this information. And thanks for visiting libertyblitzkrieg.com and sgtreport.com. If it weren't for you guys standing up for truth and speaking out, if it weren't for you listening and sharing this info for others, we'd probably stop doing it. And you're the reason we're here. And thanks for listening today.